Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. A day after returning from a state visit to China, President Lee Jae-myung told his senior aides that the trip had fully restored relations with Beijing. He once again stressed the importance of pragmatic diplomacy focused on national interests, adding that there are no permanent friends or foes in the international order. The final hearing of former President Yoon Suk-yeol's insurrection trial began this morning, and all eyes are on what punishment he will face, with life imprisonment a possibility. Once today's hearing concludes, the case will move to the court's verdict, which is widely expected next month. As the U.S. discusses options to acquire Greenland, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned Europe to take President Donald Trump seriously. He says if European allies do not take the security of the island more seriously, the United States may step in. We begin this morning with President Lee Jae-myung's weekly meeting with his aides, a day after returning from his trip to China. Presiding over the meeting on Thursday, he called for pragmatic diplomacy, saying there are no permanent friends or foes in the international order. Our Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
영원한 적도, 영원한 우방도, 또 영원한 규칙도 없는 냉혹한 국제 질서 속에서 대한민국의 운명은 우리 스스로 개척하는 국익 중심 실용 외교에 달려 있습니다.
The South Korean president made an assessment of his four-day state visit to China, noting that the trip served to fully restore Seoul-Beijing relations, while the Blue House, citing foreign media reports, assessed that it displayed the Lee Jae-myung-style pragmatic diplomacy. Thursday's weekly meeting with the senior aides was more than just that.
2026년이 성장의 대전환을 통한 국가 대도약의 출발점이 되도록 이념과 진영을 넘어 국민의 역량을 하나로 모아가겠습니다.
President Lee Jae-myung underlined policies to bring changes that make people feel an actual difference in their everyday lives, while noting the need to shift away from heavy concentration of resources on certain groups or regions.
특히 지방, 중소벤처, 스타트업, 그리고 청년 등 상대적으로 소외됐던 영역들이 새로운 성장의 축으로 자리 잡을 수 있도록
Topics included ways to prepare for a transition to the AI era, checking what's needed, and bolstering related international cooperation.
To turn AI into our growth engine and the infrastructure of our daily lives, we discussed a comprehensive strategy, such as securing infrastructure and seeking new industries.
The meeting came amid intensifying global competition over energy, as some watchers view the recent U.S. attack on Venezuela as linked to oil. President Lee also instructed his officials to brace for a change in energy paradigms, citing increasing global uncertainties. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned Europe to take President Donald Trump seriously on Greenland, as Washington weighs options ranging from security pressure to direct payments to Greenlanders, despite Danish objections. Now the move comes as U.S. intervention in Venezuela deepens following the seizure of Nicolas Maduro, with Trump signaling a prolonged role. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned European leaders to take President Donald Trump seriously over his push to bring Greenland under U.S. control, as Washington signals it is prepared to act if security concerns are not addressed. Speaking at a White House briefing on Thursday, Vance said the United States believes Europe has failed to adequately safeguard Greenland's strategic importance. He warned that if European allies do not take the security of the island more seriously, the United States may step in. Greenland occupies a key position between Europe and North America and plays a critical role in the U.S. ballistic missile defense system. The island is also rich in rare earth minerals and other resources, aligning with Washington's broader effort to reduce dependence on China for strategic materials. U.S. officials have discussed a range of options for acquiring Greenland. According to sources familiar with the matter, the White House has considered offering lump sum payments to Greenlanders as part of a bid to persuade the population to secede from Denmark and potentially join the U.S. Internal discussions have included figures ranging from $10,000 to $100,000 per person, though no final amount or mechanism has been decided. Officials say the proposals are among several ideas under consideration, including the possible use of U.S. military power. The debate over Greenland comes as U.S. actions elsewhere raise fresh concerns among allies. With U.S. forces carrying out a military operation that seized Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, President Trump said U.S. intervention in the South American nation could last for years. In an interview with the New York Times on Wednesday, Trump said only time will tell how long the United States will oversee Venezuela's governance following the operation. He did not specify when elections might be held to replace the interim administration led by Maduro ally Delcy Rodriguez. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, European leaders and the United Nations have voiced strong concern over the U.S. recent actions that appear to turn away from its allies and subvert global rules. Our Oh Soo-young has more.
French President Emmanuel Macron has warned that the United States under Donald Trump is turning away from its allies and breaking with the international rules it once promoted. Macron made the remarks on Thursday amid growing uncertainty over Washington's global role and its commitment to the rule of law. This as the Trump administration continues to issue statements on controlling Greenland, a territory of fellow NATO member Denmark.
The U.S. is an established power, but one that is gradually turning away from some of its allies and freeing itself from international rules it promoted not long ago, whether in trade, certain security matters, or some forums.
Germany's president delivered a similarly blunt assessment. Frank-Walter Steinmeier warned that there is a breakdown of shared values with Washington, which was Europe's most important partner in shaping the world order. Steinmeier said U.S. behavior represented a second historic rupture of the global system after Russia's annexation of Crimea and its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He called for stronger collective action to prevent lawlessness on the world stage. As questions swirl around the future of U.S. global engagement, the United Nations has expressed regret over Washington's decision to withdraw from dozens of international and UN bodies, including a key climate framework and an organization promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. Trump said the bodies operate contrary to U.S. national interests.
The Secretary General regrets the announcement by the White House regarding the United States' decision to withdraw from a number of United Nations entities. The UN is an organization of 193 member states, 2 observer states. It is in the interest of all these member states and the 2 observers to defend the principles that they themselves have created.
The US is the largest contributor to the UN's regular budget, paying the maximum assessed rate of 22%. The regular budget for 2026 totals around $3.45 billion, covering political missions, humanitarian operations, disarmament efforts, and economic and social affairs. The US made no payments to the regular budget last year, meaning it owes roughly $1.5 billion, according to the UN spokesperson. While the US Constitution allows presidents to join treaties with the approval of 2/3 of the Senate, it does not clearly define the process for withdrawal, raising questions over whether a future president could simply reverse course. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
So the United States says it's discussing options to acquire Greenland and that it'll not rule out the use of military. For more on this, we're joined today by Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Connolly, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
So this Trump's idea of acquiring Greenland isn't new, but do you think military intervention is actually realistic?
Right. A decade ago, even the question of using military force against a NATO ally would be something out of the pages of a kind of unbelievable science fiction novel or a cheap thriller movie. But the Trump administration has this habit of joking about something and they gauge the resistance to the idea, they keep joking about it, and then they actually do it. And I think this has a lot to do with like how taboos work. The more you talk about a taboo, the more it seems acceptable, the more it fades. And I think talking about using violence against a NATO member is a symptom of just how much the world has changed. That being said, I don't think the US will use military force like we saw in Venezuela or Iraq in 2003. The US would rather purchase the land or kind of force some concessions from the Danish government. But if violence or military force was used, I would expect like a hybrid warfare model. So lots of US disinformation, political influence operations, cultivation of a separatist movement in Greenland that would then request the US military's assistance. And for those of you that know your history, this is exactly how the United States got Texas in the 19th century. So it's not an unbelievable kind of occurrence.
I see. And the U.S. Secretary of State says he will meet with Danish officials about Greenland next week. How do you think the talks will play out?
Right. It's important to bear in mind that in these talks, there's actually going to be three groups in the room: the United States, the Danish government, and also officials from Greenland, which is a self-governing part of the Danish kingdom. And this is going to make it hard for Denmark to kind of negotiate with the United States, because in a three-actor game, the US can put a lot of enticements and pressure on the Danish government or the Greenland officials, which will make it hard for them to create kind of a united front. More broadly, I think Denmark's European allies are also torn between this desire to preserve US support in the war in Ukraine, but also trying to criticize US kind of talk about use of violence or violations of Denmark's sovereignty. And this really exposes Europe's hollow position right now. Europe started off with the second Trump administration trying to use a lot of flattery. The Secretary General of NATO called Trump daddy, but this flattery has not worked. The United States simply just keeps elevating their concessions. And right now, the Europeans need to win in Ukraine, which needs US support, but they also need Greenland, which means resisting US demands. It's going to be very difficult to do both, in my opinion.
Right. And how might all these latest developments surrounding Greenland sort of affect Washington's relations with countries like China and Russia?
On the surface, I think many commentators think that Russia and China are secretly happy to see the United States burning down its own alliances. But I think more fundamentally, there is a big difference between Russia and China, in my opinion. I think Russia has a lot more similarities with the United States. They are both strong military powers that have engaged in illegal wars. They're kind of rogue actors in today's international system. China, I would suggest, is much more status quo. And when I say China, this also, I would say, includes all of Northeast Asian states, Korea, Japan. We all need freedom of the sea. We need the globalized trading order. China is deeply concerned about the unraveling of this rule-based globalized system, because this is what helped pull tens and hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and there's still a lot more work to be done. So when you see these kinds of US, basically stopping tankers on the high seas, this is definitely very concerning for Chinese policymakers, because unlike Russia, which has kind of been a loser of globalization, China and I would say South Korea and Japan have been winners in globalization. So all three countries have to be deeply concerned about the US willfully unraveling the globalized and rule-based system.
I see. And on Venezuela, the U.S. says the only oil transported in and out of the country will be through approved channels consistent with U.S. law and national security interests. What's your take on this, and how might this affect the broader geopolitical landscape?
Right. Again, many commentators call this the Trump administration's own goal, right? They're doing something that's hurting their own cause. But this is assuming that the US is playing the same game as everyone else. And Trump has been saying repeatedly that he's not playing the same game that previous US administrations have. Even today, he gave an interview talking about that he doesn't believe in international law, just his own morality. To be honest, the liberal world order is dying, and the US is the main actor doing it. And it's not just a Trump problem, though. I would say it goes back to the illegal NATO war against Kosovo in 1999, Iraq invasion of 2003, then Russia, the war in Georgia, the war in Ukraine. When the hegemon starts breaking international law, it empowers all sorts of other actors to do similar transgressions. In the past, US allies felt quite safe, thinking that US behavior only affected other countries. But recently, we see Trump now doing this to their own allies. Greenland, Canada being described as the 51st state, casual discussions about invading Mexico. I think this is sending a chill throughout the world order that being a friend of the United States does not give you safety anymore. And I think this really underscores that we need to start thinking about diversifying our international relations for middle powers and small powers and cultivating autonomy so that sometimes we can say no to unjust demands by great powers.
Right. All right, Professor Connolly, thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The main criminal trial determining whether the December 3rd declaration of emergency martial law constitutes insurrection has just begun its final phase. The Seoul Central District Court is holding closing arguments on Friday in the case that charges former President Yoon Suk-yeol with leading an insurrection, alongside senior military and police officials accused of carrying out key roles. The closing session comes 402 days after the martial law declaration and 341 days after Yoon became the first sitting president in South Korean history to be arrested and indicted. Prosecutors are presenting their final arguments and sentencing requests, followed by closing statements from the defense and the defendants themselves. Once today's hearing concludes, the case will move to the court's verdict, which is expected next month. The United Nations has forecast global economic growth at 2.7% this year, slightly slower than in 2025 and below pre-pandemic averages. In its latest outlook released on Thursday, the UN said the global economy remains resilient, despite higher tariffs supported by solid consumer spending, accommodative monetary policy, and stable labor markets. However, it warned that trade growth is likely to slow in the near term. South Korea's economy is projected to grow 1.8% in 2026 and 2% in 2027, broadly in line with the Bank of Korea's forecast, as easing inflation and recovering domestic demand provide support. Team Korea is gearing up for a pivotal year on the global sporting stage, especially as the Winter Olympics near. The push begins with the 2026 training commencement ceremony for national athletes held at Korea's main training center. Our correspondent Park Gon-woo has the story.
Sliding and gliding smoothly before accelerating as if it were an actual race. For these Korean national team athletes, slowing down is not an option as the clock keeps ticking, lap after lap, in pursuit of their goals.
I feel grateful to compete in my third Olympics alongside such great teammates. I'll give it my all once again, and with the skaters that I trust, we will show once more why Korea is a powerhouse in short track.
And it's not just the ice skaters who are shedding blood, sweat, and tears. Athletes from other disciplines, including curling, are also fully locked in, carrying bold ambitions of their own. That comes as mixed doubles curling is the very first match for Team Korea in the upcoming Winter Olympics.
We always review our matches, focusing more on the positives. That's helped us improve over time. We're confident we will win the first game, and a strong start will definitely boost the morale of the entire Korean team.
In about 30 days' time, these athletes will finally get the chance to show the world the effort they've poured in for months, possibly years, at the Winter Games in Milan and Cortina d'Ampezzo for around 2 weeks. And that determination is on full display, as loud Team Korea chants filled the air during the 2026 training commencement ceremony held Wednesday at the Jincheon National Training Center in Central Korea. Athletes from a wide range of sporting disciplines, also including summer sports, gathered, reaffirming their resolve for the season ahead. With major international competitions lined up this year, including the Winter Games, Korea's sports ministry says expanded government support is on the way.
International competitions are major events that reflect a nation's global standing. The fair play and confident sportsmanship you show in competition make Korea a source of pride worldwide. Our ministry will continue to support you fully so that you can focus solely on training and turn all your dreams into reality.
While South Korea claimed 2 gold medals at the Beijing Winter Games 4 years ago, this time the country now aims to add at least 1 more, possibly from disciplines beyond its traditional ice sports strongholds. With just about a month to go until the Olympics begin, athletes will continue to train hard, carrying the determination they forged here, aiming to make the national anthem echo through arenas and help South Korea shine on the global stage. 박건우, Arirang News, Jincheon.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. A deadly shooting by federal immigration agents in Minnesota has ignited protests across the United States. Video footage showing an ICE agent shooting 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good during an anti-ICE protest in Minneapolis on Wednesday has spread online and fueled nationwide demonstrations. Vice President J.D. Vance defended the agent's actions on Thursday, calling the shooting self-defense and labeling the case as a federal matter after the FBI took control of the investigation. Minnesota officials pushed back, accusing federal authorities of blocking state involvement. The White House has vowed to continue ICE operations, while local leaders demand an independent investigation. Protests erupted in Iran's capital Tehran on Thursday night after a call by the country's exiled crown prince for mass demonstrations. Crowds chanted from rooftops and flooded streets, tearing flags and setting fire to symbols linked to the current government while calling for a return to monarchy-led rule. Iranian authorities cut internet and phone services almost immediately, signaling preparations for a crackdown. The unrest follows weeks of nationwide protests driven by economic collapse, including a currency crash and market shutdown. Human rights groups confirmed at least 41 deaths and over 2,000 arrests as the unrest spread to rural provinces. U.S. President Donald Trump has warned he will hit Iran, quote, very hard if peaceful protesters are killed. Saudi Arabia has accused the United Arab Emirates of secretly smuggling a wanted Yemeni separatist leader out of Yemen. Saudi officials on Thursday said Aidalus al-Jubaidi, the leader of the Southern Transitional Council, fled by boat to Somalia before flying to Abu Dhabi. The UAE has not publicly responded to the accusation. This comes as the Saudi-UAE partnership in the Yemen war unravels, with separatist forces advancing and Riyadh launching airstrikes against the group. NASA has decided to shorten a mission aboard the International Space Station after an astronaut experienced a medical issue. The agency said on Thursday that the 4-member U.S., Japanese, Russian crew will return to Earth days earlier than original plans, canceling scheduled spacewalks. NASA said the medical issue arose on Wednesday and stressed the astronaut is now stable, describing the move as a precaution, not an emergency evacuation.
It was another cool start for the commute this morning, but temperatures will climb nicely this afternoon and we'll get a brief break from the cold on Saturday. But that pause will not last long as another round of freezing air returns on Sunday. However, rain or snow will begin tonight in Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, then spread nationwide over the weekend. Parts of Gangwon-do and Jeollado provinces could see up to 15 centimeters of heavy snowfall. The capital region will get 1 to 3 centimeters mainly on Saturday. But this afternoon will be much warmer than yesterday, topping out at 6 degrees under cloudy skies here in Seoul, Daegu, Gyeongju, both topping out at 7 degrees Celsius. Now plan accordingly for your weekend. There will be snow and freezing temperatures. Then brace for an intense cold snap through next week with more rain or snow expected across Korea.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.